This is a true story, but the names of the characters have been changed. Welcome to today's story, a story that's almost too shocking to believe. Imagine a family built on trust and love, where everything seems perfect, until a hidden betrayal threatens to destroy it all. This is the heart-wrenching tale of a husband who, in a moment of weakness, crosses the line with someone he should never have been close to, his own wife's daughter. What follows is a cascade of secrets, guilt, and broken trust that no one could have ever prepared for. In this video, we'll explore every emotional twist and devastating consequence that comes from one of the most heartbreaking betrayals a family can endure. Prepare yourself for an intense journey of love, loyalty, and the painful choices that define us. Let's dive in and uncover how one man's actions tore apart the people he loved most, and the haunting aftermath that followed. We moved to Willow Creek in the summer of 2019, about a year after Karen and I got married. Willow Creek is a quiet coastal town in Massachusetts, just an hour's drive from Boston. It's the kind of place where the downtown streets are paved in brick, and there's a little cafe on the corner called Willow's Brews, where the locals meet each morning. There's also Willow Beach, where nearly everyone in town gathers at dusk to catch the sunset. I remember our first walk around town together, just Karen, Lily, and me. When we passed an antique store, I popped inside and grabbed an old magnifying glass. Holding it up and surveying the street, I joked, "This marks the start of our journey of discovery." Karen laughed, and though Lily looked a bit embarrassed, she was soon intrigued, wanting to try it herself. Seeing her relax and laugh, I felt like this truly was the beginning of a new chapter for our family. At the time, Lily was 19 and a freshman at UMass. Independent and a bit wary of having me join the family, she kept her distance at first. I didn't want to push things, I knew it would take time. One afternoon in early August, Karen asked me to help Lily set up her room because she wanted to change the curtains in our new house. When I walked in, I could tell Lily felt a bit awkward having someone else at her space, so I casually said, "I'm just here as your assistant. You take the lead, and I'll follow." Slowly, I could see her start to relax. When we found an old photo album of Karen's, we both laughed at Karen's very fashionable college hairstyle. It was the first time I felt Lily opening up, setting aside the awkwardness, and beginning to talk to me more naturally. One early September Saturday afternoon, we went to the Willow Creek Farmers Market by the town's Central Park, where everyone gathers on weekends. Karen sent me to get some milk, but when I came back, I picked up a few different types: soy, almond, low-fat, and even unsweetened. I looked at Karen with a serious face and said, "I couldn't decide which one you'd want, so I got them all." Lily burst out laughing, and I knew I'd brought a little fun into their day with that small gesture. Lily was meticulous and disciplined. In her room, there was a board showing her class schedule, her shifts at the campus cafe, the Bean Spot, and even her gym sessions at the Willow Creek Sports Center. One October afternoon, as we prepared for a camping trip to a national park about 30 minutes away, Lily carefully listed everything we'd need: food, cooking supplies, even a first aid kit. I joked that she was preparing for a great expedition, but when we realized we'd forgotten a lighter, she proudly pulled out a box of matches she'd packed just in case. "I knew we'd need it," she said, and I looked at her with pride, realizing that her thoroughness and planning were just parts of who she was. One chilly November Wednesday evening, the three of us sat down to watch The Notebook in our cozy living room. Winters in Willow Creek get pretty cold, with thick fog blanketing the town at night. At first, I joked that the movie was the cheesiest film ever made, but during one of the emotional scenes, I glanced over to see Lily discreetly wiping her eyes, and I was, too. Karen laughed at us both, and Lily glanced at me, her face slightly flushed with embarrassment. Sunday mornings, our small kitchen in Willow Creek became the heart of our family breakfast. I usually took charge of the pancakes, trying out different shapes, hearts, stars, even monsters, that I invented on the spot. Lily would try to copy me, but her pancakes often stuck to the pan or turned out lopsided. Once, she attempted a sea monster with 2 tentacles, but it ended up as a lumpy, asymmetrical blob. We laughed until we cried, and Karen, sipping her coffee, watched us with a warm, contented smile. Karen was always thorough when it came to family outings. One weekend in early December, we planned a picnic by the lake just south of town. She packed everything imaginable: food, spare clothes, all the little necessities. Lily and I joked that she was preparing for a grand expedition. I even made a paper hat and put it on, declaring, "Ready for battle." Lily donned a hat too, joining as my assistant, and seeing Karen laugh at our silliness made me feel incredibly grateful for these light-hearted, joyful moments. In these simple, everyday scenes, I began to see the unique qualities each of us brought to the family. Lily was thoughtful and organized, Karen was warm and caring, and I wanted nothing more than to keep everything light-hearted and fun. Every time I saw Karen and Lily chatting on the back porch over ice cream or helping me in the kitchen, I felt a deep happiness. Willow Creek wasn't just a place to live, it was a place where we built beautiful memories and where I truly felt like I'd found the family I'd always dreamed of. It was a cool Saturday afternoon, and we'd just come back from a casual lunch outside. Karen was busy in the kitchen unpacking groceries, and Lily had run upstairs to get ready for a night out with friends. I grabbed her iPad, planning to snap a few photos of the backyard garden I'd recently updated. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a quick shot or two to capture my work. But as I opened the iPad, I somehow stumbled upon her search history. I hadn't intended to snoop or see anything private, but then, a few words caught my eye. I read them, feeling an uncomfortable jolt as I tried to process what I was seeing. Her search history, it contained phrases that just shouldn't have been there, phrases that didn't belong between a father and daughter. I shut the iPad immediately, but the shock lingered. My mind started spinning, and I couldn't shake this unsettling feeling of disbelief. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, wide awake. Karen was sleeping peacefully beside me, completely unaware of the storm raging in my head. Those words from Lily's search history played over and over in my mind, an unnerving chorus I couldn't ignore. I kept telling myself it must have been some kind of mistake, a passing phase, or even something innocent. I convinced myself I could brush it off, keep it from Karen, and avoid disrupting the family. All I had to do was keep being the dad I'd always tried to be, steady, loving, and reliable. But it wasn't that simple. From that day on, every interaction with Lily felt tense and awkward. Sometimes it was just a look she gave me, or the way she laughed while talking to Karen. Each time, a wave of doubt would wash over me. Had I missed something between us? In my attempts to be the father figure she needed, had I unknowingly crossed some boundary? The truth is, Lily and I have always been close. We've spent countless hours together, taking walks, sharing hobbies, even working side by side on restoring an old car in the garage, a project I took particular pride in. She once told me I was the dad she'd never really had, that I made her feel safe and cared for. Hearing that, I'd felt a deep sense of pride. But now, those memories only made me question myself, leaving me to wonder if I'd somehow given her the wrong impression. The tension started taking its toll on my relationship with Karen, too. Every time we'd sit down for dinner, or whenever she'd happily chat about Lily's future, I'd feel like I was hiding a burden I couldn't bear. I couldn't look her in the eye, knowing I was holding on to a secret I couldn't keep. The guilt was eating away at every ounce of peace I used to feel. I kept telling myself it was a fleeting misunderstanding, something I could easily ignore. But facing the truth was proving harder than I could have ever imagined. After stumbling upon those search terms, I tried to dismiss it, convincing myself I could keep things in check. But curiosity, along with a creeping sense of discomfort, started to invade my thoughts, no matter how hard I tried to push it all aside. Day by day, it felt like I was descending into a strange, dark corner of my own mind, one that I'd never really had to face before. Lily remained herself, though, bright, carefree, always laughing and open whenever we spent time together. But I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. In the quiet moments when we'd sit together in the living room, with Karen busy in the kitchen or upstairs, I found myself watching her too closely, paying too much attention to her expressions, her gestures. She'd ask me simple, innocent questions sometimes, questions that used to feel harmless. But now, those same questions seemed layered with complexities I couldn't fully understand. I began to wonder if I'd ever accidentally crossed a line, or if I'd unintentionally given her the wrong impression. The more I thought about it, the more I felt myself drifting, lost. Every Saturday night, we had this little tradition of watching a family movie together on the couch. It was originally my idea, a way to bring us closer as a family, to ensure Lily knew she had a father figure in her life. But now, as soon as the movie would start, I'd feel tense, restless. Lily would curl up next to me, sometimes leaning on my shoulder or snuggling against me, like any young daughter would. These gestures, which once felt like nothing more than sweet signs of our bond, now unsettled me. I didn't know how to act, and I'd sit there, forcing myself to appear calm, hoping things would feel normal again. One weekend, Karen suggested that Lily and I go for a hike together. She thought it would be a nice father-daughter bonding experience since she was busy with work and couldn't join. At first, I thought it was a good idea, a chance to reset, to reconnect in a way that felt wholesome. But as we walked through the quiet forest trails and eventually camped under the vast, starry sky, I felt a strange unease I couldn't shake. We sat by the campfire, laughing and telling stories, but I kept reminding myself to keep a respectful distance. Each time she laughed, her face gently illuminated by the firelight, I'd tell myself, she's just a young girl with an innocent heart, someone I'm meant to protect and guide. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't ignore the turmoil building inside me. Every word she spoke, every brief touch, would leave my mind spinning. Was I reading too much into this? Or was I letting my emotions cloud my judgment? After that camping trip, I knew that whatever peace I'd once had was gone. Karen, always so perceptive, noticed something wasn't right with me. Occasionally, she'd give me a questioning look or ask if I was stressed. I'd manage a smile, offer her some excuse, and change the subject. This tension followed me every day. Even during our family dinners, when Karen shared stories from work and Lily eagerly talked about her plans for college, I felt like an outsider, disconnected from my own family. The clear boundaries that used to define my relationship with Lily felt dangerously fragile. No matter how much I tried, I couldn't reclaim the ease and peace I once had with her. I kept telling myself that I could manage it, that keeping this turmoil to myself was the best way to protect everyone. But day by day, that strange feeling gnawed at me, chipping away at whatever inner calm I had left. Each time I saw Lily, that quiet unease crept back in, making me feel like a stranger in my own home. I couldn't shake the sense that the boundaries I'd once held so firmly were starting to blur in ways I hadn't anticipated, and I wasn't sure if I could handle it. One Sunday morning, we decided to have a picnic at the local park, a family tradition we'd kept for years. Karen packed our favorite foods, and we stretched out on the grass under the gentle spring sunlight. Lily settled down next to me, and with her usual enthusiasm, she started talking about her plans for college, her dreams for the future, and everything she wanted to experience. She was always so full of life and optimism, her eyes sparkling in a way that had always filled me with pride. But that day, I couldn't seem to relax. Every word she spoke, every glance she sent my way, felt charged, almost like I was holding my breath. I kept reminding myself, this is your daughter. Just stay calm. But the more I tried to keep my thoughts in check, the more they seemed to slip through my grasp. Another afternoon, Karen had to work late, and Lily asked me to help her with a science project. We sat together in the living room as she outlined her ideas, her energy and excitement pouring out. I nodded, offering feedback, proud to see her so invested. But sometimes, she'd glance up at me, waiting for reassurance, trusting. And when she laughed at my jokes or leaned over to adjust her notes, her hand would sometimes brush against mine. These little gestures, once so innocent, now made me tense, like I was trespassing an unspoken boundary I didn't fully understand. I'd always cherished the close connection we shared, the strong father-daughter bond. I thought back to the nights in the garage, when we worked on my old car together. She'd pepper me with questions about the engine, and I'd explain, feeling proud to teach her something real. She'd joke that I was her first real teacher when it came to anything mechanical. I felt like I was making a difference, like I was the steady father she could depend on. But now, those same memories felt heavy, like I'd lost some vital perspective. Had I, without realizing, encouraged something unintended? The tension wasn't just affecting my time with Lily, it was beginning to pull at my relationship with Karen too. At the dinner table, Karen would chat about her day, laughing, and Lily would share updates about her friends and her school projects. But I'd sit there, feeling like an outsider, distanced by a secret. I avoided Karen's gaze, afraid she'd sense the turmoil I was holding back. Being perceptive as she was, she'd asked a few times if something was on my mind. I'd smile, make up a quick excuse, and change the subject, hoping she'd let it go. But as each day passed, I could feel my sense of control slipping, no matter how much I told myself I could handle it. One Saturday afternoon, with the house quiet and still, Karen had gone out to meet friends. It was just Lily and me at home. I was in the living room, flipping through blueprints for a project, when Lily walked in and took a seat across from me. She looked nervous, her fingers playing with the hem of her shirt, a different side to the girl who was usually so confident and bright. "James," she began, her voice uncertain but resolved. Normally, Lily was candid and bold, a spark that came with being young and unguarded. But today, there was something vulnerable in her expression, a mix of hesitancy and intensity. "There's something I want to tell you," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "But please, don't tell Mom." My heartbeat quickened, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" I replied, trying to keep my tone steady and reassuring. Lily glanced down, her fingers tracing the bracelet on her wrist, the one Karen and I had given her for her birthday. Finally, she looked up and said, "I know, but lately, I've had these feelings that, well, I don't really know how to explain. Feelings that don't feel quite like they should between a dad and daughter." I froze. Her words left me stunned for a moment, wavering between disbelief and shock. I'd always seen Lily as my daughter, wanting only to be someone she could count on. But now, with the way she was looking at me, and what she'd just said, it felt like something had broken between us. "Lily," I started, trying to find the right words. Maybe you're just confused. It's not uncommon to misunderstand emotions, you know, especially when someone steps into a father's role you hadn't had before. That doesn't mean you." I hesitated, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "I know it sounds strange, but I just can't help it," she whispered. "Please don't tell Mom. I don't want her to be hurt." I felt torn in two. Part of me wanted to reassure her, to help her make sense of her feelings and move on. But another part of me knew how much Karen trusted me, how my role was to keep our family steady and whole. This conversation felt like the first crack in everything we'd worked so hard to build. That night, when Karen got home, I could barely look her in the eye. I decided I'd keep my distance from Lily, hoping that if I set boundaries, things would eventually return to normal. But it proved far more challenging than I'd anticipated. Every weekend, we had a tradition of watching a family movie together. Lily usually sat beside me on the couch, sometimes leaning her head on my shoulder or sharing a blanket with me. It used to feel completely natural, a simple way to connect as a family. But now, each time she got close, I felt a strange tension, uncertain how to respond. Lily seemed to notice the shift between us, though she didn't say anything. One evening, while Karen was cooking in the kitchen, Lily came over to show me some photos on her phone, a bunch of silly shots with her friends from drama club. She was animated, excitedly sharing details about their upcoming play, her eyes lighting up as she talked about her role. I tried to smile, to act as I usually would, but I couldn't shake the heavy feeling weighing me down. Another time, when Karen was out of town for work, Lily suggested we bake cookies together, something she and Karen usually did on weekends. I agreed, thinking maybe it would help bring us back to a comfortable place. But all afternoon, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Each time Lily laughed or moved around the kitchen, I found myself tensing up, reminding myself that this was just a normal family moment. But nothing felt simple anymore. One evening over dinner, Karen beamed with pride as she shared that Lily had received a letter from a college she was interested in. Lily was excitedly going over her plans, and I could see the pride in Karen's eyes, hear the enthusiasm in Lily's voice. But as I sat there, I felt strangely distant, like I was carrying a heavy secret right there in the middle of our family. After that night, I told myself I just needed to keep a little distance from Lily, hoping that time would ease things and bring back the sense of peace we'd once had. But life isn't that simple. These confusing, unnamed feelings gnawed at me, creeping in no matter how much I tried to push them away. Each day, I felt torn between what I knew was right and the irrational pull I couldn't understand. Karen seemed to be growing more distant too. I could feel her pulling away, retreating into her own world. She'd been through a lot in her first marriage. I knew there were still scars that hadn't fully healed. Maybe I hadn't realized just how much they still affected us. I tried to be there for her, but every time I attempted to bring us back to where we once were, it felt like reaching across a glass wall, close, but just out of reach. There were nights I lay beside her, the gap between us feeling colder and more distant than the room itself. Gradually, that gap between us grew, a space neither of us knew how to bridge. And in that space, Lily became this warm light, a presence that brought something I hadn't realized I was missing. I knew it was wrong to see her that way, but a part of me couldn't deny the comfort, the sense of connection that she brought. Then one day, things took an unexpected turn. Lily leaned in and kissed me. Just for a second, I froze, a storm of emotions hitting me harder than I could have ever imagined. She whispered, saying that no one would ever know, that it could be our secret. In that split moment, I felt myself pulled in, caught up in the warmth, even though I knew how wrong it was. I pulled away, telling her to keep her distance, but I knew it wasn't going to be as simple as that. Afterward, thoughts of a secret relationship haunted me like a shadow I couldn't escape. The chill in my marriage, the unspoken silences, and the chronic loneliness started turning my buried emotions into something darker. I knew better than to entertain those thoughts, but the idea of finding a sense of relief, a sense of closeness with Lily, lingered like a drug slowly taking over my mind. I tried to avoid her, to create space and protect us both from what we'd almost fallen into. But Lily continued to find ways to pull us closer, subtle touches, the way she looked at me, almost innocent but with something unspoken beneath the surface. It left me feeling like I was standing at the edge of something forbidden, caught between guilt and desire. It was like a current, pulling me in when I should have been swimming away. There were nights, after Karen had gone to bed, when I lay there, my mind a chaotic mess, wondering how I'd let things get this far. I thought back to the first time Karen and I met, the sweet early days full of promises and dreams of a life together. But now, with each passing day, the coldness between us felt more real. And in that space, I found myself more easily drawn to the warmth and innocence that Lily offered, things I no longer felt with Karen. And then I started to wonder if holding on to this marriage was even worth it. Karen had grown so distant, it felt like there was no place left for me in her heart. But with Lily, there was an undeniable connection, a strange mix of familiarity and mystery that kept drawing me in. She was the only one who truly listened, who truly saw me, and in my weaker moments, I found myself wanting to turn to her to fill the loneliness that Karen had left behind. I knew I couldn't keep going like this. But each time I saw that vulnerable look in Lily's eyes, that yearning, I felt like a man lost in his own twisted emotions, unable to find the way out. Since that day, I kept telling myself I needed to put more distance between Lily and me, hoping that time would ease everything and restore the peace we once had. But life is rarely so simple. These strange, unnameable feelings kept gnawing at me, slipping through every defense I tried to build. Every day, I felt caught between what I knew was right and an irrational pull I couldn't understand. With each passing day, Karen seemed to drift further away. I could sense her slipping into her own world, and maybe I hadn't realized just how deeply her past hurt had affected our marriage. I'd tried to reconnect, to reach for the happiness we once shared, but every attempt felt like trying to hold on through a glass wall, close, yet completely out of reach. There were nights when I lay next to her, feeling colder and lonelier than if I'd been alone. It was as if an invisible wall stood between us, a divide that neither of us knew how to bridge. Gradually, that distance became wider, a crack neither of us seemed able to repair. And in that empty space, Lily felt like a spark of warmth, a light I hadn't realized I still needed. I knew it was wrong to think of her that way, but a part of me couldn't deny the comfort she brought, that rare feeling of connection I no longer found with Karen. I tried to avoid her, to create space, hoping to protect us both from where we were headed. But Lily kept finding ways to bring us closer, subtle touches, a glance that lingered just a little too long, something unspoken but undeniable in her eyes. Each time, I felt myself standing on the edge, wrestling between guilt and a deeper, unspoken desire. It was like an undercurrent, pulling me further out each time I tried to swim away. There were nights when, after Karen had fallen asleep, I'd lie awake, wrestling with the chaos in my mind. I'd wonder how I'd let myself get here, how I'd allowed these feelings to take root. I'd think back to when Karen and I first got together, those early days filled with promises and dreams of a happy future. But now, with each day that passed, the coldness between us felt more real, making it all too easy to feel drawn to Lily's warmth and innocence, qualities I no longer found in Karen. Bit by bit, I started to wonder if trying to hold on to this marriage was even worth it. Karen seemed so far away, like there was no longer any room for me in her heart. But with Lily, there was this undeniable connection, a blend of familiarity and mystery that kept drawing me in. She was the only one who truly listened, who seemed to understand, and in those vulnerable moments, I found myself wanting to turn to her to fill the empty space that Karen had left behind. I knew I couldn't keep going like this. But every time I saw that soft, searching look in Lily's eyes, that quiet intensity, I felt like a man adrift in his own tangled emotions, struggling to find solid ground. One weekend, Karen let me know she'd be working late. It was just Lily and me at home, talking in the living room. The conversation started light, about school, then gradually shifted to deeper topics. Lily began asking me questions about loneliness, love, and how adults handle things when life gets hard. There was a focus in her eyes, as if she were searching for something that even I couldn't quite name. Then she asked, "Do you ever feel lonely, even when there's someone right beside you?" Before I could respond, she went on, "I think, sometimes people just need someone to listen. Not because they can't handle things on their own, but because they want to feel understood." Her words struck a chord deep within me. She was right. I hadn't felt truly seen or understood in a long time. And in that moment, as I looked at her, I felt an unusual sense of comfort, a sense of understanding that I didn't even realize I'd been missing. I didn't answer her directly, just gave a soft smile, but inside, my emotions were like waves crashing against a fragile shore. In the days that followed, Lily's presence seemed to draw closer. She'd text me randomly during the day, asking how I was, if work was stressful, and her messages carried a warmth that I hadn't felt in ages. One night, she sent me a song, saying it brought her peace and that she hoped it might do the same for me. As I listened, I couldn't help but smile, feeling the small bit of comfort she'd offered, even though I knew I was treading on dangerous ground. One night, after Karen had gone to bed, Lily texted me, saying she was sitting out on the porch and wanted to talk. My heart raced as I made my way outside, knowing it probably wasn't wise, but unable to stop myself. Lily was there under the gentle porch light, her hair softly blowing in the evening breeze, her eyes holding something I couldn't quite place. We sat on the steps, quietly looking out over the dark, still yard. "Do you ever think, sometimes all people really need is just to have someone there with them?" she asked, her voice soft, almost a whisper. I nodded, unable to meet her gaze. In that silent moment, I felt as though I were drifting in a storm, pulled in different directions, without any clear way forward. One day, Karen suggested that she and Lily go shopping together, but Lily declined, saying she needed to catch up on some studying. So Karen headed out alone, leaving just Lily and me at home. Lily proposed we try making a dessert she'd recently seen in a video and asked if I wanted to help. Before I knew it, we were standing side by side in the kitchen, doing something that should have felt perfectly natural, but instead held a tension neither of us acknowledged out loud. As we worked, Lily chatted and laughed, filling the space easily, as if everything was normal. But each time she handed me an ingredient or her hand brushed mine, I felt myself edging closer to a line I knew I shouldn't cross. Once, I caught her looking at me, something unspoken in her expression, something that held a dangerously magnetic pull. Soon after, she started suggesting we go for evening walks, saying it helped her unwind and clear her mind. Walking together under the dim streetlights, our conversations grew heavier, both of us aware of an unspoken tension that seemed to be testing boundaries neither of us had named but both understood. One night, during a family movie, she rested her head on my shoulder, pulling the blanket a little tighter around us. This time, she was closer than usual, her warmth blurring the boundary I'd been struggling to keep in place. Just her touch, her presence, was enough to drown me in emotions I knew I shouldn't have, leaving me torn and trapped in something I couldn't quite escape. I told myself I needed to stop, to put an end to these feelings. But every time I saw Lily smile or felt her gaze linger on me with a gentle warmth, I found myself slipping deeper into emotions I knew were wrong. My heart and mind were at war, and I knew that the more I tried to pull away, the more entangled I became in this web of forbidden feelings. As the weeks passed, the boundaries I'd tried to maintain with Lily grew fainter, and I found myself increasingly drawn in, more caught up with each passing day. I knew I needed to stop, to find a way to end the growing tension between us, but I couldn't deny the comfort and companionship I felt around her. And each time Karen and I were together, the distance between us seemed more obvious, the silence between us louder than any conversation. One evening, with Karen out at a company event, Lily and I sat in the living room, a familiar quiet settling over us. She suggested we watch a movie, just the two of us, something we hadn't done in a while. I reluctantly agreed, hoping that maybe a normal evening could help bring back some sense of balance I was so desperately trying to find. As the movie played, I could feel her presence beside me, her warmth fill in the small space between us. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for a moment, I felt the calm that had drawn me in before. I knew I should pull away, but instead, I let the moment linger, feeling her closeness and wondering how everything had gotten so complicated. During the movie, she looked up at me, her face softly illuminated by the glow of the screen. "James," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sounds of the film. "Why does it feel like we're the only ones who really understand each other?" The question lingered in the air, and I knew she was voicing what we both felt but hadn't dared to say. There was something between us, an understanding, a connection, that neither of us could quite ignore. I looked down at her, trying to find the right words to make sense of the conflicted feelings swirling inside me, but nothing seemed to come. "I don't know," I finally answered, my voice quiet and uncertain. "But maybe we just need to be careful, Lily." She nodded, her gaze lingering on me a beat too long before she looked away, and the moment passed. But the tension between us didn't fade. If anything, it seemed to grow, lingering even after the movie ended, leaving us both silent and contemplative. In the days that followed, Lily continued to find small reasons to spend time with me, asking for help with school projects or simply sitting with me in the living room as I worked. I found myself looking forward to these moments, even though I knew I shouldn't. She'd sit beside me with a notebook or laptop, occasionally brushing her hand against mine when reaching for a pen or piece of paper. It was subtle, but each touch left a lingering warmth I couldn't ignore. One weekend, Karen planned a short trip to visit her sister. She asked if I was all right staying back, and I quickly agreed, thinking it would give us both some space to breathe. But I hadn't considered what it might mean to be alone in the house with Lily for an entire weekend. On Saturday morning, I woke up to find Lily already in the kitchen, making breakfast. She greeted me with a warm smile, her hair slightly tousled, looking relaxed and at ease. "Thought I'd make us something special since it's just the two of us," she said, setting a plate down in front of me. We sat down to eat, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I felt comfortable, as though all the tension and confusion had melted away, replaced by a simple, quiet companionship. We laughed, talking about anything and everything, and it felt so natural, so easy. But beneath the surface, I could sense the familiar undercurrent of something deeper, a pull that both of us were resisting but couldn't quite ignore. Later that day, as we sat together on the back porch, Lily began sharing memories from her childhood, her dreams, her fears, things she'd never spoken about before. She leaned in a bit closer as she spoke, her voice soft and sincere, and I found myself drawn in by her words, by the openness she was offering. In that quiet moment, with the sun beginning to set and the warmth of her presence beside me, I felt a mix of emotions, comfort, curiosity, and an awareness that we were walking a line neither of us fully understood but could no longer deny. "James," she said, looking out at the yard, "do you ever wonder what life would be like if we weren't bound by all these expectations?" I knew what she was asking, what she meant, and a question settled heavily between us. Part of me wondered, too, feeling the pull to let go of the guilt and secrecy, and to finally allow myself to express the emotions I'd been hiding. But deep down, I knew that giving in would only lead to pain and regret. Sometimes, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "But some things just can't be changed, Lily." She nodded, a mix of understanding and disappointment in her eyes. We sat there in silence for a while, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on us. The sky began to darken, and as day turned to evening, I felt the reality of our situation settle in, a reminder that this tension, this connection, couldn't continue without consequences. That night, we decided to watch another movie, something light to distract us from everything. But as we sat together on the couch, wrapped in the familiar warmth of each other's presence, the line between what was right and what felt inevitable grew even blurrier. She reached over, her fingers brushing mine, and a wave of warmth rushed through me, as if that touch carried all the loneliness, all the yearning, finding an unexpected release. For a moment, I allowed myself to stay there, to let my guard down and just feel. But when I looked at her, saw the hope in her eyes, reality came crashing back. I knew that if I let things go on, if I gave in, we'd both pay a price neither of us could afford. I pulled away, forcing myself to disconnect. "Lily," I began, my voice unsteady, "we can't keep going on like this. It's complicated." Her face fell, and I could see the hurt in her eyes. But she nodded, understanding, even though I knew it wasn't what she wanted to hear. In the days that followed, I tried harder to create distance, to rebuild the boundaries we'd crossed. But each time I saw her, each time she looked at me with that same quiet yearning, I felt my resolve weaken, the walls I'd put up cracking under the weight of emotions I couldn't deny. I knew we were standing on the edge of something irreversible, but the deeper I got, the harder it became to pull back. I found myself questioning everything, my marriage, my decisions, the life I'd chosen. And with each passing day, I felt myself being drawn further from the stability I'd once known, pulled into something that both scared and enticed me. After that difficult conversation, I could sense something had shifted in Lily's gaze. She seemed to be holding herself back, trying to keep the warm familiarity we once had at a cautious distance. But this new distance only made things more complicated. Each time I saw her, I felt an inexplicable sense of loss, as if the space between us was growing deeper rather than easing the tension. There was a quiet sadness in her eyes, a sadness she never voiced, but I knew it was there. One evening, when we passed each other in the kitchen, she gave me a slight nod before turning away without a word. To anyone else, it might have been a simple gesture, but to me, it was a painful reminder of all the things we both longed for but couldn't allow ourselves to have. That feeling weighed on me too. Every day, I told myself I needed to end this connection entirely, but the harder I tried, the more entangled I felt, as if there was no real way out. One evening, I saw her sitting on the back steps, watching the rain fall quietly into the darkness. She sat there alone, not saying a word, and that image of her, so silent, so introspective, stirred a familiar loneliness in me, a feeling I recognized all too well. As time went on, I found myself noticing every little detail about her, each glance, each word. I wondered if she still thought of us the way I did, or if her feelings had started to fade. But one evening, while Karen was working late, I was sitting alone in the living room when Lily appeared in the doorway. The dim light cast a soft glow over her face, her expression a mix of hesitation and resolve. She stepped in and quietly sat beside me. "I just wanted to say." "I'm sorry," she whispered, looking down, her fingers nervously twisting a fold in her sleeve. "Maybe I've made things more complicated." Her apology broke my heart because I knew this wasn't just her fault. I gently placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to reassure her. No, Lily, you don't need to apologize. This is on me. I should have been strong enough to set boundaries from the beginning. Lily looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of pain and determination. But I don't want to lose you. I mean, you're the only one I feel I can really talk to. I don't know what happens next, but I don't want it to end here. Her words left me speechless because we were both caught between wanting to be close and fearing the loss of something irreplaceable. I didn't respond. Instead, I just held her hand for a moment, a quiet reassurance as if to calm us both. In the days that followed, the distance between us softened in subtle ways. We didn't speak openly about it, but the moments we crossed paths seemed to linger just a little longer. Every time our eyes met, we'd hold back, saying nothing, but a quiet understanding hung in the air. Sometimes, just her presence beside me was enough, a silent closeness that I couldn't seem to let go. One late night, after Karen had gone to bed early, there was a soft knock on my office door. I was focused on work, trying to drown my mind in tasks, but the hesitant look on Lily's face as she stood in the doorway made every other thought fade away. I couldn't sleep, she murmured, her eyes holding a quiet sadness, as if there was something she couldn't put into words. I motioned for her to come in, and we sat together in silence, neither of us wanting to break it. In that moment, I realized just how deep our connection had grown, how few words we needed to understand each other. She rested her head on my shoulder, and I sat there quietly, feeling each breath, every unspoken feeling hanging in the air between us. We both knew that no matter how hard we tried, distance couldn't erase what was already there. As we sat there, the stillness wrapped around us, filling the room with a strange, bittersweet tension. Lily didn't move, her head still resting against my shoulder, and I could feel her steady, warm breaths matching the rhythm of mine. For one brief, fragile moment, it felt like everything was okay, as if this was where we were meant to be, even if only for a fleeting second. But beneath that calm was an undeniable current, a yearning we both tried, and failed, to ignore. Breaking the silence felt impossible, so we stayed like that, side by side, as if words might shatter the fragile understanding we'd found. But I knew that we couldn't continue like this forever, that sooner, or later, something would have to give. I found myself wondering how we'd gotten here, to this impossible place, where silence was both a refuge and a burden. Then Lily spoke softly. James, do you ever wonder if things could have been different? Her question hung in the air, unanswerable, yet somehow inevitable. I didn't know what to say. I felt a guilty ache mixed with a strange sense of comfort, a quiet acknowledgement that, yes, part of me had wondered. Wondered what it might be like if things were different, if the world had somehow placed us on another path. But to admit that out loud felt like crossing a line I wasn't sure I could come back from. Maybe, I finally replied, my voice barely more than a whisper. But we both know that it can't be, Lily. She nodded, a resigned sadness flickering across her face. But she didn't move, didn't let go. In that moment, I could see her own internal struggle, the battle between respecting the boundaries we knew we should hold and the pull to keep this connection, even if it meant walking along that thin, fragile edge. The days passed, and despite our efforts to keep a respectful distance, small moments kept pulling us back together. A quiet dinner alone at the table when Karen worked late. A walk through the garden at sunset, where we barely spoke, but every unspoken word seemed to hang between us. Even a brief glance in the hallway felt weighted with a shared history, something we both felt yet couldn't acknowledge. Then, one weekend, Karen went to visit a friend in a nearby town. I thought the space might help, that maybe a few days alone would clear my mind. But instead, the emptiness of the house only amplified everything, the quiet reminding me just how much I looked forward to those fleeting moments with Lily. I found myself glancing toward the living room, hoping she'd walk in, say something simple yet meaningful, and share just one more moment. One evening, as I was sitting alone, there was a soft knock at the door. Lily stepped in, looking hesitant yet determined, as if she'd spent the entire day debating whether or not to come in. She held a cup of tea, a small excuse to be near, though we both knew it was more than that. She handed it to me, her hand brushing against mine for just a second too long before she sat down across from me, her eyes searching mine. "I don't know how to keep going like this," she admitted, her voice trembling with a vulnerability I hadn't seen in her before. "I keep telling myself to stop, to keep things the way they are, but it feels like we're pretending to be strangers when we're not." Her words mirrored my own thoughts so painfully that it was almost unbearable. I wanted to tell her I understood, that I felt it too, the push and pull, the need to stop and the ache to stay. But I also knew that acknowledging it wouldn't change the impossibility of our situation. The truth was, we were bound to paths that couldn't intersect, tied to roles and responsibilities that made any future between us unimaginable. "I know," I said quietly. It's harder than I think either of us expected." Lily looked down, her fingers playing with the edge of her sleeve. "I thought maybe time would make it easier. That if we stayed apart, these feelings would fade. But they haven't." She looked up, her expression a mixture of confusion and longing. "And I don't know what to do." The weight of her words hung between us, filling the space with a tension that was almost unbearable. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be all right. But I knew that would be a lie. There was no easy way out of this, no clear answer that could save us both. "Maybe we can find a way to get through this," I suggested, though the uncertainty in my voice betrayed my own doubt. "Maybe, if we focus on other things, give it time, things will eventually settle." She nodded slowly, as if trying to convince herself that what I was saying could be true. But I could see the hesitation in her eyes, the same doubt that had haunted me for weeks. We both knew that even if we tried, even if we filled our days with other distractions, the connection between us wouldn't fade easily. Over the next few days, we fell into an unspoken agreement to avoid each other. We stayed busy with separate activities, filling the quiet with housework, with work, with anything that might keep our minds occupied. But at night, lying awake in the silence, I felt the weight of that quiet, the ache of something unspoken, hovering just above me. One evening, I found myself standing by the window, looking out into the dark, quiet yard. I heard soft footsteps behind me and turned to see Lily standing in the doorway. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at me for a moment, before walking closer to join me by the window. Together, we stood in silence, gazing out at the scattered stars, as if searching for answers we both knew we wouldn't find. "James," she whispered, her voice breaking the silence, "I know we can't change things, and I know it's wrong, but I just wanted to say thank you. For listening. For being there." I felt a pang in my chest, a mixture of gratitude and regret. I wanted to say something, to offer her some kind of comfort, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I reached out, hesitantly taking her hand in mine, and for a moment, we held on tightly, finding solace in that shared silence, in a bond that both held us together and tore us apart. In that moment, I realized that no matter how much distance we tried to create between us, this connection, this quiet understanding, would always be there, just beneath the surface. It was both a comfort and a curse, something as beautiful as it was painful. And as we stood there, hands clasped, I knew we would always be bound by this unspoken connection, even if life would never allow us to fully share it. It was 4 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon in December, in Willow Creek. The town was bustling as people poured onto the streets to prepare for the holiday season. Christmas lights hung from the store windows, and their reflections on the damp sidewalks created a sparkling, chilly atmosphere. I stood still on the sidewalk, hands buried in my thick coat pockets, feeling the cold settle into the quiet of these less frenzied downtown streets. The weight of sleepless nights had made my steps feel heavy, and finally, after countless nights of restless thoughts, I knew I needed to talk to someone who would understand. David, my closest friend from college, a professional therapist, and the only person I completely trusted, was the first person who came to mind. He lived a few hours' drive away, but this time, I asked him to meet me at our old coffee spot right here in Willow Creek, the place where we'd spent late nights during college, talking about life, ideals, and those early loves we once thought would last forever. I called David, and thankfully, he agreed without hesitation. Sometimes, just one good friend can make everything feel a little lighter. When I walked into the coffee shop, David was already there, sitting at our usual corner table by the window that overlooked Willow Creek's Main Street. His espresso cup was half empty, and he offered me a small smile, though I could see a hint of concern in his eyes, as if he could sense the weight of whatever was troubling me just from the way I buttoned my coat or the heaviness of my steps. "It's been a while, hasn't it?" David said quietly as I took a seat. I nodded, trying to return the smile, though it didn't come out quite right. "Yeah, it has." "You doing all right?" I asked, though I wasn't really waiting for his answer. Finally, I knew it was time to get to the real reason I was there. The warm glow of the cafe lights couldn't quite melt the chill that had settled inside me. When I started to speak, my voice wavered, and the words spilled out, almost uncontrollably. I told David about the past few months, the sleepless nights, the unbearable tension. I admitted to an affair I'd never meant to start, a reckless mistake following what I thought was a minor argument with my wife, Karen. David listened quietly, his expression free of judgment. He sipped his coffee, his gaze steady on me, allowing me to speak without interruption. When I finally finished, he set down his cup, raised an eyebrow slightly, and asked, "Do you think you can be honest about this? First with yourself, and then with Karen?" David's question hit me hard. Honesty? It sounded so simple, but saying the truth would feel like a devastating blow to the woman I'd promised to stand by for life. Karen, who had built what seemed like a complete life with me here in the quiet suburbs of Willow Creek, would have to face a truth that would break her heart. "David," I asked, my voice hoarse, "if honesty meant losing everything, would you still do it?" David didn't answer right away. He leaned back, his eyes contemplative, but never leaving mine. "Sometimes, honesty isn't something you choose, it's something you have to face," he said. "Karen deserves to know the truth, no matter how much it hurts." Lily always knew how to weaken my resolve, and when she suggested that our upcoming family trip could be an opportunity for us, I knew it had to end. But somehow, I didn't say no. The thought of a weekend away, just the two of us, hidden and unnoticed, was too tempting to resist. I didn't want to admit it, but the loneliness in my marriage with Karen had created spaces within me I didn't know how to fill. And in that vulnerable moment, I agreed. We met in a small, quiet town where no one knew us, slipping into the shadows and taking the risk. That weekend was a whirlwind of emotions, a mix of passion and guilt, with the constant fear of discovery lurking around every corner. Every time I looked at Lily, I knew I was playing with fire. But then, one night, as we talked, she turned to me with a serious expression and asked, "If this comes out, will you take responsibility?" Her question stopped me cold. In that instant, I realized the full weight of the risks we were both taking. There was no such thing as a truly safe secret. And in that moment, I understood that my choices had set us both on a path with consequences I could no longer ignore. That weekend with Lily haunted me, her question echoing in my mind. Even after we parted ways and returned to our lives, the guilt lingered, simmering as each day passed. It wasn't long before things started to feel different at home. Over the next few weeks, I noticed something new in Karen's gaze, a sharpness I hadn't seen before. It was as though she was watching me, studying my every move. Whenever she tried to talk, I'd make excuses or avoid her entirely, but the more distant I became, the more she pressed with subtle, probing questions. She didn't say anything outright, but I could feel it. Karen was starting to suspect. I knew I'd have to be more careful. Karen had never been one to ignore her instincts. Then one day, I found tracking software installed on my phone. Realizing it was there hit me like a punch to the gut. She must have put it on without my knowledge, searching for the truth her suspicions pointed toward. I deleted it immediately, but doing so only seemed to make her even more suspicious. Suddenly, she was watching every move I made, scrutinizing every call and every time I left the house. She even enlisted a few mutual friends to keep an eye on me. No matter how carefully I tried to cover my tracks, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was closing in. But she didn't stop there. Her attention shifted to Lily. She started talking to Lily, subtly probing, looking for any slip-up that might reveal what I'd tried so hard to hide. The tension was suffocating, and I couldn't escape the fear of wondering how long Lily could hold up under Karen's steady, piercing gaze. Both Lily and I tried to keep our composure, to act as if nothing was out of the ordinary, but Karen was sharp. Each day, her questions to Lily grew more pointed, and I worried that the pressure would soon break us. Just when I thought I might be in the clear, Karen announced a work trip for the weekend. It sounded harmless, and I felt a rare wave of relief, a chance to meet Lily without constantly looking over my shoulder. But Karen had an entirely different plan. Instead of leaving town, she secretly booked a hotel room nearby and stayed behind to keep tabs on me. The minute I left the house, she called a friend to follow me, hoping to get the proof she needed. At the last moment, a strange instinct led me to change the meeting location with Lily. That choice was the only thing that saved me. Karen missed her chance, coming up empty-handed once again. But I knew my time was running out. Each close call didn't bring relief, only a stronger sense that the collapse of everything I'd built was inevitable. This secret couldn't stay buried much longer, and I dreaded the day the truth would finally come to light. I never expected Karen to go to such lengths. Her suspicions had become a shadow, creeping into every corner of our family life, keeping me constantly on edge, haunted by fear. Every time I thought I'd successfully covered my tracks, her vigilance only intensified. I was exhausted, my life cracking under the weight of secrecy and lies, and no matter how hard I tried, escape felt increasingly out of reach. Karen's suspicions clung to me like a shadow, following me everywhere and closing in with each passing day. Just when I thought I'd eluded her, she'd take another step closer, and the pressure became impossible to ignore. Her quiet probing forced Lily and me to tread carefully. We cut back on texts, kept our meetings brief, choosing places so discreet we convinced ourselves no one would notice. That day, to avoid any risks, Lily and I decided to meet in my car, parked in an isolated spot outside of town where no one we knew would pass by. We thought the car would be the safest place to talk, just the two of us, sharing worries and stolen moments, hidden from the world. But even in that privacy, I couldn't shake the tension that now accompanied every conversation. We needed to be honest with each other, to share the weight of our fears, and so we sat in the dim light, whispering our frustrations and secrets as if that alone could make them safer. What I didn't know was that Karen had already pushed things further than I'd realized. She had a friend pose as a valet and discreetly plant a recording device in my car. I had no idea that everything I said that day, every confession, every careless promise, was being captured, adding to the proof I'd tried so hard to bury. When Karen listened to that recording, I can only imagine what she felt: hurt, anger, betrayal. But instead of confronting me, instead of any loud argument or ultimatum, she did something unexpected. She stayed silent. She held back, choosing to wait, as if giving me one last chance to come clean on my own. It was a silence that carried an ominous weight. I had no idea she knew everything. Karen kept her knowledge to herself, going through our daily routines as though nothing had changed. But there was a chill in her eyes, a detachment I couldn't ignore. Her restraint was remarkable, beyond what anyone could endure. My life spun on in a cycle of lies, secrets, and cover-ups, unaware that Karen had already laid the trap. She was just waiting for the day I'd step into it, unprepared for what was coming. That night, I could tell Karen was looking at me differently. I sensed it before she even spoke. There was an intensity in her gaze that was more than curiosity or concern, something darker, something that made me feel she knew more than I wanted her to. She began with a simple, "James, we need to talk." And I knew right then that this wasn't one of those casual conversations about her day or mine. This was something different. When I sat down, she didn't waste any time. She started listing the things she'd noticed, how something had felt off for a while, how I'd been acting strangely. She looked at me with a calculating, almost icy look, and honestly, it made me feel small, as though I'd been caught in something I couldn't simply wave away or explain. I tried to keep my composure and said, "Karen, I don't understand what you mean." But she didn't believe me, not for a second. She cut me off before I could say more, and then she dropped the bomb. I heard everything, James. My stomach dropped. She'd heard it, she'd heard us. The moments I thought were hidden, secure, had been laid bare. And there she was, holding the truth like a blade aimed directly at me. She didn't hold back, throwing questions at me like, "Did you really think I wouldn't find out? And do you even realize what this has done to me?" Her voice was sharp, full of anger, yes, but mostly hurt. I could see the disbelief in her eyes, as if she still couldn't fully comprehend why I would do this to her, and to Lily, of all people. And honestly, I couldn't answer her. I simply couldn't. She demanded to know why. Why I did it, how I could betray her like this. I tried to explain, though even to me, it sounded hollow. I told her I felt distant from her, that I was lonely, that I didn't know what I was doing until it was too late. But she threw it back at me, her voice rising, asking if I thought that was some kind of excuse. Of course, I didn't. I told her I was sorry, but even to me, the words felt empty. She just looked at me, shaking her head, and said, "James, I trusted you. We trusted you. You've broken this family, and I don't know if I can forgive you." When she got up and walked out, I didn't follow. I couldn't. I just sat there, staring at the floor, realizing what I'd done, how, in just a few selfish, thoughtless moments, I'd thrown away everything that once mattered to me. That night, in the silence after she left, I finally understood that there was no going back. After everything fell apart, Karen withdrew into a dark place I couldn't reach. She didn't accuse me, didn't yell, didn't demand explanations anymore, she just went silent. Silent in a way that made it feel like I was looking at a stranger, a different version of the woman I had once promised to stand beside forever. Karen seemed to turn her anger inward. She never said it outright, but I could see it in her. There were times I'd catch her staring into space, her eyes empty and filled with pain. It was heartbreaking to realize that, in her mind, she blamed herself for not seeing it sooner, for letting things go so far. All she'd ever wanted was a whole, peaceful family. And me? I destroyed that dream, turned her hope into a nightmare. In the months that followed, it was like Karen lost her sense of purpose. She pulled away from everything, her friends, her colleagues, and even from Lily, our daughter, whom she'd always cherished above all else. And Lily was struggling too. I could see the remorse in her every quiet gesture, the way she seemed to carry an invisible weight of guilt she didn't know how to express. But somehow, neither of them could bring themselves to talk. It was as if an insurmountable wall had been built between them. I knew I was the one who'd driven Karen to this place, turning a woman who had once been so full of life and hope into a shadow of her former self. The hardest part was watching her blame herself, as if she thought she was somehow at fault for everything unraveling. Eventually, Karen decided she needed to get away for a while, to find her own peace. She told me she needed space and time to process everything that had happened. For the first time, I saw a kind of clarity and resolve in her, not anger, not even pain, but a steady, almost cold detachment, as if she had finally come to terms with something deep inside herself. Karen chose to travel alone, searching for a place far from anything familiar, somewhere she could leave it all behind, me, and all the weary memories we'd shared. During that time, there wasn't a single call or message from her. And with each passing day, I knew she was freeing herself from me, from the pain and guilt I'd left her with. When she finally came back, I knew right away what was coming. Karen met with me, calm on the outside, but her eyes were empty, devoid of the warmth I used to know. She told me she wanted a divorce, but not out of hatred or anger. She needed to leave that dark chapter behind so she could truly live again. Karen explained that she had loved me deeply, had once believed we'd build a forever together. But then, with unshakable resolve, she said she couldn't continue living with the scars I'd left. There was no room for argument, no defense I could make. Standing there, facing her firm decision, I realized I had truly lost her. Everything we'd built together, everything family had once meant, gone, and nothing I could do would change it. I had no choice but to let go, painfully aware that I was the one who'd driven Karen to a place she could never return from. Lily stood by her mother. She told Karen she wanted a fresh start with her, a way to make up for all that had gone wrong. She promised to be there, to help her heal and rebuild a close, unbreakable mother-daughter bond. After all the paperwork was finalized, Karen and Lily moved to a new city. Karen opened a small flower shop. It was clear she'd always had a passion for flowers, and now she'd finally found a sense of peace being surrounded by them. An old friend, Michael, kept in touch and helped her through the difficult transition. But Karen, showing a level of strength and maturity I hadn't seen before, decided not to rush into any new relationship. She wanted to take her time to heal and rediscover herself. As for me, I was left with only emptiness and regret. Everything had become a memory of what I once had and what I'd thoughtlessly lost. There's a unique kind of pain that comes with looking back, a pain I never knew until I had to face it alone. Sometimes, I replay moments from our life together, like when Karen and I moved into our first home, the house where we thought we'd grow old together. We painted the walls, laughing at each other's messy efforts, picking out furniture, never realizing how fragile that life we were building really was. I remember Lily's first steps on those creaky hardwood floors, the way Karen's face lit up every time Lily smiled. Back then, I believed our life was unbreakable, as if the simple truth of our love could protect us from anything. But love, as it turns out, is delicate. It needs nurturing, like the flowers Karen now surrounds herself with. Neglect it, and it withers right in front of you. Now, every corner of our house serves as a reminder of the family we once were. I find myself wanting to reach out to Karen, to tell her I've changed, that I finally understand what I hadn't before. But does it matter? She's living her life without me, and I've seen how she's grown, stronger, wiser, at peace. That thought brings a strange mix of pride and sadness, knowing she's found her strength in my absence. In a way, maybe I'm fortunate. I get to keep the memories, even if they haunt me. And maybe that's my punishment, to live with the echoes of the life I had and the emptiness left by my own actions. There's no one to blame but myself. And now, all I can do is wonder, what if I had seen it sooner? What if I had cared enough to stop before it was too late? But life doesn't wait for you to catch up or realize what truly matters. It just moves on. And so does Karen, so does Lily. And here I am, left with the echoes of what might have been, living in the heavy silence of what's no longer mine.